Decimals carry a lot of information, and sometimes we don't need it all, which is why estimating is a really useful skill. You can save time, you can get a rough idea of how much something will cost, whether you can afford something. For example, over here I've got a bill at a restaurant. So 4 friends went out to eat, they got some entrees, an appetizer, and a drink. Is this bill approximately correct? When I take my family out to eat, probably about 10 to 15% of the time, there's an error in the bill. Now, a few cents I don't worry about, but being overcharged $10 or $20 is significant, especially if in about 30 seconds you can see if there might be something amiss. Not that it's their fault, usually. I've managed a restaurant, I've managed teams of servers, and they're busy, and usually they're quite happy if you help them catch an error, because they don't want to do that. So is this a reasonable total right there? Say you went to a hole-in-the-wall restaurant and they did it quickly on a calculator, or they did it by hand, which I've seen. Well, there are 3 estimating tools that I want to show you. Each is good for its own context. So for this one, rounding is one method, and of course you want to pick the place that you round to. Since I've got tens and ones here, as well as dimes and pennies, perhaps rounding to the nearest dollar would be the most useful and not too bad in terms of time. So then we would round this to 16, 14, just rounding to the nearest one, 14, 10, and 13. We could add them up. We've got 10, 6 and 4 is another 10, so that's 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. About $70. Okay, so this is actually not too far off. This is quite reasonable. That is a tool called rounding. You round them all to the same place. And of course, again, place matters. If you wanted to be really rough with your numbers, you could round to the nearest 10. I'll do that over on this side. So if we round to the nearest 10, of course it's going to look quite different. And we get a rough estimate of 60. Much faster, not as useful, but we're at least in the ballpark. It's not too far off. There is another method that is gives you more detail than rounding. In essence, it's sort of like rounding to 2 places, and it's called front-end estimation. And it's very similar to the first rounding that we did, but I'll show you the difference. Front-end estimation, they call it front-end estimation because you add up the first digits. Alright, so the most significant, the largest, I'd say, here would be the tens, the first digit, you add them all up. And then you round the rest. First digit, add or subtract, whatever you need to do. So for example here, my tens, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just say, alright, 40. And then the rest, I'll round the rest. So again, there's 6, 4, 3, 4, and this one would be 10 and 3, and then we'd add up 10, 20, 30, 70. So it's pretty much the same as adding up all these 2-digit numbers, but you're doing it in 2 steps. And so that's a useful tool as well. Sorry, down here. That's where I added up my front-end estimation numbers. Let me give you another situation with front-end estimation. Let's say we went out and got coffee and some snacks. and this was our bill. Alright, so front-end estimation, I would add up these numbers, so 5, 10, 14. And then I'm going to, from here on, I'll round. So I've got a 5, a 9, a 10, a 6, a 7, and a 10. We've got 14, 24, 30, 47, and of course that's 4.7 given where I'm at. And this bill should be about 1870. Whoops. Forgetting my camera field is actually smaller than I think. I'm going to have to make an adjustment there. Okay, so I added up the front numbers, 14, and then I have so many numbers, that's why it's taking up so much space. And then I round the rest, and I add those up. And that gives me my 470, and I add those together. So front-end estimation can sometimes, or often really, be more accurate than rounding. And it's because I'm breaking it basically into two steps. Adding up my first numbers exactly, which isn't too bad because it's just one digit, and then rounding the rest and combining that information for quite a precise estimation, as estimations go. Alright, here's the difference from rounding. If I rounded here, right, if I would round to the ones place, 3, 4, 5, 2, 1, 5, so 10, 1, 2, 3, 4 is 20. Okay, also not too far off, right, but you can see less detail than the front-end estimation, even though it's a little quicker, right? I still have to think about rounding 6 numbers when I round. With front-end estimation, I add 6 numbers and then I round 6 numbers. And I get a more precise value. Alright, there's another method called clustering, which works if you spot, if you happen to see that your numbers are all fairly close together. So let's say you go out to eat with some friends again, and you look at these and you say, you know what, all of those kind of cluster. So this is called clustering, as in they form a cluster, they're kind of grouped around one area. Well, what might that be around? Well, they're all kind of around 15. Right? We've got some that are below, some that are above, and some that are right about 15. So I've got 5 of them. It's kind of like I'm looking for the average if I can spot it. And I could say, well, that's probably really close to $75. All right, so that will work if your numbers are all clustered around a certain value. It doesn't really work for this, or it's a little bit harder to kind of pick for this set. I could say, oh, if I had to guess at an average, I might say 3. 3 times 6. Well, that's 18, so that's not too bad either. Or over here, it's hard because they're so different. But if I said, you know, maybe they average out to, most of them are more than 10, there's only one that's less than 10, I don't know, 12? And that would give me 6 times 12, or 72. And by the way, this isn't the actual sum of these numbers. I just made that up. Alright, so that is 3 ways to estimate in a nutshell. Rounding, right? Pick one place and round all of those numbers to that place. Whether the 10s, faster but less information, or the 1s, right, takes a little bit more work but it's closer. A more precise way of rounding is front-end estimation, where you add the first digit and round the rest. Takes another step, but if you need it to be closer, then that's very useful. And finally, clustering, if your numbers all cluster around a number.